Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this CAICEED public panel discussion. And we really want to thank International Press Institute for their fabulous support during the week that we've been here. This is about the clash of perceptions and the depiction of faith. I'm Peter Kaiser, Director of Communications at CAICEED, which stands for the King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz International Center for Interreligious and Intercultural Dialogue, the world's longest acronym. Now, before I get into the context of the panel, let me introduce to you the panelists who've come here, in some cases quite a long way. To my immediate right is Melissa Chia Annan. She is the editor of The Inquirer, which is the oldest post-war independent newspaper in Liberia. She's also the director of communications of the Assemblies of God in Liberia, and she's a former vice president of the Press Union in Liberia. Next to Melissa, on her right, is Maria Saliba. She's a producer at Al Jazeera English in Doha. She brings in influential newsmakers for interviews and also produces documentaries. Before her career began at Al Jazeera, she was a practicing lawyer in Australia and also an accredited conflict mediator. To Mary's right is Khaled Batarfi. He is a senior writer for the Saudi Gazette, also an assistant professor at the Prince Sultan College for Business and Tourism in Jeddah, and he was managing editor of two newspapers successively, Al Madina and Al Watan Daily. In addition, he's authored 16 books. And to Khalid's right is Endi Bayuni. He's the senior editor at the Jakarta Post, and prior to his career at the Post, he was the Indonesian correspondent for Reuters and Agence France-Presse. He's also served as a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University before taking up his duties as senior editor at the Jakarta Post. And very quickly, in a couple of minutes, because I know that the clock is ticking, let me just give you some context as to why CAICEED really would like to have this panel discussion with you. As I said, it's about perceptions, and religious people tell us at CAICEED that they don't recognize their faith when it's depicted in the media. That's one side of the story. A dialogue always results from two sides of the story. We want to hear what you think about that. CAICEED is a dialogue enterprise. It's the first intergovernmental organization with a mandate, an international mandate, to bring people together who never or very rarely meet and who have never tried to make each other understood to each other. This dialogue is undertaken to reduce conflict and also to combat prejudice. You'd like to know how we do it. One way we do it is to communicating through education. Education is a means whereby people learn about others' beliefs, their cultures, their traditions. And media is one of the world's most powerful informal educators. The media frames perceptions about cultures and religions, and that's why we feel we could quite constructively build relationships with you. Now, CAICEED is a very new organization. We're just entering our second year of operation. In this quarter, we are concentrating on this idea of media and the image of the other. The image of the other refers to the other people of other faiths and other cultures. And we've been meeting media experts and journalists, and they have been providing us with the recommendations and best practices that already exist for accurate reporting on other issues, as well as their recommendations about how to address the issue of the feeling of the audience that their depiction is not accurate. And with IPI's fantastic support, we had a working meeting on Saturday with journalists from 35 countries. They also provide us with more recommendations and advice, and I hope some of that will flow into this discussion. And finally, before our panelists begin, let me just answer one question that I've heard frequently while I was in Cape Town, and that is that CAICEED does not wish to promote religion as such. That's not our job. We do not also want to influence you to only promote religion in a positive manner. We're not looking for positive coverage of religion. Rather, press freedom is for CAICEED an inalienable human right. It's actually anchored in the founding agreement, which is an international treaty where we reaffirm the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So I think we have a natural affinity, and what we do want you to encourage you to do is to look at dialogue to bring about conflict resolution, dialogue to build peace, as an ethical necessity, as a public good, in the same way that your reporting supports and sustains environmental responsibility, political integrity, and other issues of that nature. So without any further ado, I would like to now introduce Melissa Chianan with her story of dialogue in Liberia. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Let me just extend my thanks and appreciation to the organizers of this program for a 40-minute opportunity to come and share my experience from Liberia. We are looking at the role of the media in the portrayal and perception of religion. I'm going to use Liberia as a case study. Religion in Liberia. Liberia experienced 14 years of civil crisis, and in 2003, the United Nations mission in Liberia, they were deployed, and we had like 17,000 peacekeepers in our country. We know that most of the peacekeepers came from countries around the world. And we also understand that countries around the world, some people have their own religion. So from 2003, there are several religions that are being practiced in Liberia. But officially, Liberia has two main religions, and that has to do with Islam and Christianity. The population in Liberia is 4.1 million, and out of that number, we have like 85.5% of the population in Christianity, while it is also reported that we have 12.2% of the population that belongs to the Islamic faith. But there's a third religion in Liberia, and that has to do with the traditional and indigenous people. And we have like 0.5% of the population that practice the traditional religion. But we don't really give attention to it because most of the people, they describe the traditional people as witchcraft because they often go and consult wizards to get quick answers. And sometimes people don't want to go that way, but these people believe in what they do. When it comes to the role of religion in the Liberian crisis, during the Liberian crisis, we know that religion contributed to the crisis, and it played a major role and even helped to prolong the civil crisis. The religion in Liberia at the time, it caused massive destruction. You had people of the Christian faith and the Muslim faith, they were like at loggerheads. The crisis turned around, where you had Christians killing Muslims and Muslims killing Christians. And so the role of the religion, one of the main rebel groups during the Liberian crisis, that is the United Liberation Movement of Liberia for Democracy. We usually refer to them as ULIMO. ULIMO was organized by a journalist. The journalist used his profession to raise money. He sent out communication to the Arab world to raise money. And he put the people under the impression that there was a religious war in Liberia, the Jihad war. And so when he raised money, he used the money to establish the ULIMO group. And ULIMO group, the head as a Muslim, he recruited most of his people, and it kind of like changed. It didn't go down well with the government of Liberia at the time under the Charles Taylor regime, and so they started killing the Mandingo people. Whenever they see a Mandingo person, they just conclude that you are a Muslim. And so the Muslim too, they got furious, and they started killing Christians. So it kind of like turned from Christian to Muslim war. But during the course of the war, when the Christians and the Muslims were at loggerheads, the leaders of the Islamic faith and the leaders of the Christianity faith, they came together and said that we cannot allow our country to be destroyed in this manner. And so the best that we could do, we have to interfaith. And so the Christian group and the Muslim group came together, and we had the interreligious council. When they were established as a means to bring an end to the crisis and to see how best they could put people together and to resolve the conflict. And so the RRCL, it was instrumental in formulating a framework, and they brought in the peacekeeping force, ECOWAS, and they also established the interim administration in Liberia at the time. And so the group succeeded in putting the people together. The group also succeeded in disarming the rebels, those who were fighters. So, finally, the journalists who were also reporting on religious war, something that kind of like almost tore the country apart, started to report positively. Right now, we also have like religious in government. Liberia in 1847 was established by slaves from America. After they were freed, they came to Liberia and then they discovered the country. When the free slaves came together in 1847, the Declaration of Independence was signed in the church. Because the Declaration of Independence was signed in the church, Liberia was declared a Christian state. But we also gathered some information that there were some Muslims on the ground before the slaves went to Liberia. But because Christianity had, the Muslim at the time, they thought the Christian faith was coming to change everything. So they didn't want their culture to be changed or their faith to be changed, and so they didn't make themselves known. Because the Declaration of Independence was signed in the church, Liberia was declared a Christian state. But in 1986, under the Dole regime government, he established a constitution committee, and among the people who were part of that committee was Muslim and people of different religion. And after their discussion, they decided to make some amendments within the Liberian constitution, and they said Liberia was no longer a Christian state. Instead, Liberia was now declared a secular state because they didn't want to bring problem between religious groups or so. And so Liberia is now a secular state. Now we have the Muslim, we talk about religion, you have the lawmakers, some of those who are of the Islamic faith, they are now seeking for the passage of a bill to declare Ramadan as a national holiday. But the argument is that Liberia, the Christians don't have a holiday that is being declared or passed into law. So why should we pass Ramadan into law? And they say, they talk about Christmas. We say, no, but Christmas is a national holiday all around the world. All Christians are serving. It's now being passed into the Liberian law. And so it is still being debated upon. And at first, we had that the Bible, it was being taught in all of the schools in Liberia. But of late, during this administration, the people of different faith, it didn't go down well with them. If you can teach Bible in the schools, then you must as well teach our religion in other schools. So to cut long matter short, the president decided that the teaching of Bible should be abolished in all public schools except for those religious schools. We still continue to teach Bible. So right now we don't have Bible that is being taught in the public schools. And religion is almost like creeping into the media. You have people of the Islamic faith. There are some media institutions that are being organized by people of the Islamic faith. And they try to bring in people of their own faith because they share the same belief and they feel that they will seek their own interest. And as journalists, we have to be very, very objective when it comes to our report. We don't have to be biased. We don't have to take side. We just have to be balanced in our report. But if you start to take side, it's going to affect our profession. And so we are doing everything we can to unite the media in Liberia. As I speak, for the first time in the history of the Press Union of Liberia, which is the umbrella organization for journalists in the country, we now have a Muslim as our president. And this is the first of its kind. It tells you that we are trying to bring changes into the union so that it cannot be limited to one faith. And so right now we have a union that is being controlled by somebody of different religion. So there's a way forward, as I stated. There's a need for us to put aside our religious affiliation and be balanced in all of our report. And the journalists at all times, we have to remember that we have code of ethics that are guiding us in our profession. And you know the media, you won't believe it, but there are many people who listen, especially to the radio, and they believe what you say. Sometimes the journalists will make mistakes on the radio, but because the journalist has said it and somebody listens to it, they will say, it was said on the radio, and that's truth. So they believe in us so much. That is the reason why we have to be careful what we say on the radio. We either destroy our country by what we say or unite our people by what we say. So we have an important part to play when it comes to peace building. And so we have increased media institutions now in our country. So we have a greater task ahead of us in making the public to understand that we are the watchdog of the nation, and we are there to speak the truth and nothing but the truth. And the choice that we make, as I stated earlier, is either going to destroy us or unite us. And so we have to keep standing our ground and to hold a code of ethics for our profession. With this, I want to say thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Our next speaker is Mary Sleva. Mary, over to you.
Thank you so much to Kai Said and everybody in our working group. I think we learned so much. And we just touched the surface of this very complex topic. I do work for Al Jazeera English in Doha. However, I don't represent the channel on this panel. My Director General and my senior colleagues who are here today are here to do that. But I am here because I am a working journalist, and I intend to be for a very long time. And I'm also here as a woman who has Australian mentality but an Arab heart. So my interest in religion and how it applies in the Middle East, particularly in the media, is very special to me. And this is why I'm really delighted to be here today. So when we think about religion, I mean, its very nature is subjective. It's something that's fluid. It's something that's internalized and, of course, very subjective. It's something very different from, let's say, the rule of law or legislation, something that can be applied uniformly across the board. So reporting something of that nature is difficult at the outset. And as my colleague Andy did point out, when you think about how many Muslims there are in the world, 1.6 billion, there are 1.6 billion interpretations of Islam. So I think we really need to appreciate what we are dealing with. I'm sure that religion has always been an issue in mainstream media historically, but I think coming to this working group, I was really thinking about, why are we addressing this now, and what are the elements making us think about it very carefully. Of course, the Middle East, a region that I work in and I'm very attached to, is something that I thought about for this working group. When we consider suicide bombings in Iraq, we are hearing on the news, a suicide attack has occurred in a Shia town, or we are listening to news about Lebanon. We are listening to news about Syria, what's happening in the conflict. We are hearing things about nuns being kidnapped, nuns being released, bishops gone missing. I mean, the events themselves are framed heavily in religion. The conflict itself is becoming framed in religion. Of course, outside the Middle East, we do have Pope Francis in the media, or we are reporting on the church, child sex abuse, pedophilia cases as well. So there's a lot of, we could say, negative connotations to religious identity presented in the media. And in the media, and particularly in the Middle East, I think we are mixing theology with the current political climate, and of course things like US foreign policy. Now, is it that the media is representing the reality, or are we regurgitating those voices? And are we regurgitating those voices that tend to be extreme or violent, just simply outrageous because, you know, they are dramatic, they provoke attention, and of course they provoke an audience. So I think that's something that we need to think about, why we are covering certain voices or extreme religious voices, whether it's necessary or not. In this current climate, we need to think about social media. And of course, we need to think about YouTube, something that I think this profession didn't have to deal with historically. I do remember a YouTube clip circulating a few months ago. I saw it while I was in Australia. And sadly, it was a man who claimed to be a fighter in Syria, dressed as someone of a traditional religious outfit, and was holding a statue of what some people would understand as being the Virgin Mary, and said that he discredited all religions in that land and threw the statue on the ground to smash it. So, of course, watching something like that was quite disturbing, and you can imagine something like that circulating on YouTube in a highly volatile, you know, region, and also outside the region, is quite dangerous and heightens, you know, a lot of misconceptions and stereotypes, and it creates a lot of fear. Do we really need to see that video? Does that video really serve the public interest? Is that a news story? I'm not sure. So in such a moving environment, like the social media, and considering such moving developments in the Middle East, I think we as journalists need to really think about how we can report on something like religion in a better way. I don't think we can stand back and say, you know, I'm a journalist, I'm objective, my job is to just report the facts. I think we do need to take a little bit more care and thought in thinking about what do we report on. Is it imperative that I repeat this, you know, religious person's voice when they say or when they denounce another group? You know, is that the story? So I think the nature of journalists' role is changing. Whether some of you agree or not, I'm not sure, but I would be very interested to hear your points of view. The other thing that concerns me is that when we do focus on extreme voices or when we just report on them, we are taking attention away from two things. One is, of course, minority voices or, you know, other religious groups that exist in a region. Now, in the Middle East alone, we hear a lot about Judaism through Jewish settlers. We hear a lot about Christianity. We hear a lot about Islam. But do we hear a lot about religious groups like Baha'is or Druze or Mandaeans or Yazidis or Zoroastrians? We forget that this region in particular has, you know, a huge history, and we are not addressing all the aspects because we are just focused on the loudest voices at the present time. The other thing that concerns me about focusing on extreme voices, or the media focusing on only extreme voices, is that we omit or we decrease attention on other non-religious matters that truly affect the future of a region. If we purely frame our conflict or our story in religious terms, I don't think we can do really good service to covering things like education, reform, hygiene, sanitation, town planning, drug addiction, the future of children in the Middle East. And this is what I think is imperative in news coverage. I think I'm running out of time. So I think that's all. I'll just keep it there for the moment, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mary. Khalid, over to you to take a stab at this really complex topic.
Assalamu alaikum, peace on you. The day after 9/11, American vigilance came in increasing numbers to surround our Islamic center and mosque in Eugene, Oregon. They told us, "We are here to protect you, to show you that your religion is not going to be held responsible for the crime of those terrorists in the name of Islam. To defend your fundamental right to practice your religious duties and prayers in peace and freedom." The next Friday prayer, the mayor of Eugene and his staff showed up to attend the sermons and stayed after prayer to assure us of their commitment to our safety and freedoms, and also to ask questions about Islam and its peace nature. Muslim scholars and imams were invited to speak in local churches. Members of the Muslim communities were invited to Christian and Native American events. Days after, the Oregon governor came with state justice and law representatives to tell us of our rights not to respond to any FBI investigations and interrogations without due process. If needed, free legal advice and lawyers will be provided. Hotlines were set up to help. At the same time, our university, the University of Oregon, organized an awareness campaign for its American and international students about Islam and its peaceful nature. It also set up a support center for Muslim students to advise on how to avoid troubles and provide help if needed. The university's paper and local media reported all the above and helped in a wider awareness campaign for the general public. As a result, imams with extremist message were very impressed and moved. Their views and stand towards the others were dramatically changed. Now, they talk more of interfaith cooperation, harmony, and peaceful coexistence. Some of them were interviewed in the media and invited to write in opinion pages. Eugene, the city, Oregon, the state, and its media and civil institutions, and its libertarian public were among the top places in the USA during these trying times. That not only showed religious tolerance, but actually upgraded Oregon's civility, mind, and heart to new heights of understanding and knowledge. Now, that is an educating and enlightening experience for the world to benefit from. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalid. Andy?
Thank you, and good morning to all. Before I start, I just want to put on the record a little correction about my title. This is okay, but in the program I was still listed as editor-in-chief of the Jakarta Post. I have to say, to make it correct, because otherwise I get a call from my successor saying that, why are you in Cape Town proclaiming to be the editor-in-chief of Jakarta Post? I was editor-in-chief until 2010. So if you feel shortchanged by my presence here because I'm not the editor-in-chief, you have to get your money back from IPI. However, there's one more title that maybe I could add here that make your money worse. I am a founding member of the International Association of Religion Journalists. This was founded in 2012 by more than 20 journalists from all over the world, from all faiths, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hindu, Buddhist, and from all the 6 continents. A friend of mine here, Yazid Kamaluddin from South Africa, and we had someone from Tanzania, and I think someone from Tunisia, from Africa, and then there were journalists from all over the world. And the organization has now grown with a membership of more than 400 people, journalists all over the world. And we have a website in 3 languages, in English, in Arabic, and in Spanish. And we are working on expanding the number of languages. And if you look up the website, please, it's www.diarj.org. And you will find there's plenty of resources for journalists who cover religions to help the tools. And one of them is comparative studies about the different religions in different countries. And we have held conferences in Brazil for Latin American journalists. We had one in Australia, of which I was part. We had one small one in the United States. We are looking at organizing more and more conferences in the next year or two. Of course, definitely in Africa and Asia. The objective of this organization is to promote good journalism in reporting religion. So if CAICID is not promoting religion, we are promoting the gospel of good journalism. That's what we do. Now, the topic of my presentation, I guess I'll just kind of round up from all the beautiful cases, examples that have been given by the early speakers. Basically, what I want to do here to emphasize that journalists and the media should pay more and more attention in reporting religion, because to be frank, based on my own observation and talking to my fellow journalists, we are not doing a very good job in reporting religion. Indonesia, where I come from, is a country with the largest Muslim population. Almost 90% of the population are Muslims, but we also have Christians, Hindu, a small Jewish community, about 2 or 3 families, and Buddhists. And we also have people who have kept their religions or faith that predated the arrival of religions from the Middle East and India. Some of them are animists, some of them are homegrown faith. They coexist, and I think, and we have a society that is multi-ethnic, multi-religion, that makes it prone to tensions and conflicts. You know, when it comes to faith, of course, there will be problems in the relationship between the different religious communities. Now, and then I think the case of Indonesia, I'm sure also the case of many countries in Africa, Middle East, Latin America, and also North America. Religion is a very much important part of our lives. We observe the rituals, we do all, and the religious teachings part of the values. So we govern our lives around the around the faith that we embrace. Now that means that the task of the media or journalists is to reflect on that. Yeah? But I think that the attitude, this is again that I found not only in Indonesia, the attitude of most journalists or media is to avoid religion like a plague, because it's too private. So let's not go into that. But I think the real reason why we are not doing that is because it's just too complex for us to cover. And I think journalists, we are too lazy to study into depth about the different religion, about the different faiths that exist in our communities. So just avoid it, because if we report it and then we get it wrong, we are part of the problem. But guess what? If you're not reporting on religious communities, on your societies, you are also part of the problem. Because, especially this is exposed, I think, in the case of in Liberia, this became clear that we are not doing our job right when we are reporting the tensions and conflict between the religious communities. And not only we get it wrong, but we stereotype. I mean, that's what we journalists do. We stereotype everybody, because that's in like shorthand way of explaining something that is very complex. But sometimes when we stereotype, we actually promote the prejudices that exist between one religious community against another. And sometimes some of us are probably doing it deliberately because this is part of our agenda. But I'm sure most of us are doing it out of ignorance, because we just don't know about religion. We have avoided that issue completely, so that when we have to cover issues with religion, we get it wrong and we have become part of the problem. Now, I'm trying to argue here, and I've been arguing with other colleagues since I joined the association, is that we have to make religion an important part of the newsroom coverage, especially in countries where religion is very much an important part of the people's life, and even more especially in countries where you have multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious societies. And I think most countries around the world are now that because of the migration and the transportation. So what should we do? The media. I think if you're just concerned about circulation or ratings, we cover these religious stories the way we've been covering. It's all about conflicts, and sometimes we, because we thrive on conflicts, so we like those kind of stories. But the media is part of the society where you operate. You don't want, the last thing you want is actually a religious war in your own community. And the last thing you want to do is, the last thing you want is also to be part of that problem. So I feel that media has a responsibility to help bridge the understanding between the different religious communities. And the way to do that is actually, I'm not saying that we should be preaching or we should be promoting any religion. I'm just saying that we have to do our job professionally when we cover religion. The same way that we would cover politics, sports, business, and everything. But the problem, I think my colleague from Liberia said, is that when covering religion, we have difficulties in detaching ourselves from our faith. Yeah? The faith stays with us wherever we go. Even when we go to sleep, it stays with us. So that means that when we report, inevitably, we bring the biases into our stories. We can avoid that through training. I think IEC is doing a lot of training. And then, because we want to make sure that we get it right. The bigger problem is not so much in professionalism or the lack of it or the capacity. I think the biggest problem that I find is actually the policy and attitude of newsrooms. Most newsrooms just don't care about religions because they too complex, they want to avoid it. And then every time I approach the people who manage newsrooms and ask about the religion, they say, well, no, that's too complicated. We don't, and it's true enough that I think religion is probably at the bottom of the list of stories or issues that they cover. Just one last point, I guess. We do, because since now we have an online version, every week we do a kind of survey about the most clicked, most commented, most read stories. And religion ranks among the top 4. So I think obviously stories with sex will be there, stories with animals, stories with gadgets, but stories with religion will be there. So when I was the editor-in-chief of the paper, I asked my journalists, I challenged them, can you come up with a story that has the combination of all those 4 elements, and you will get the top story of the week. So I'm going to stop that because I think we need more time for a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. We'd really like to turn the conversation over to you with your questions, and we have valiant volunteers standing by with wireless microphones, and what we'd like to do is collect a couple of questions first and then have the panel respond to those and then throw it back to you. So if anyone would like to start, please, man.
Yeah, I think I have a teacher's voice. Thanks for the value added. Professor Batarfi, I liked your piece on what happened in Oregon after 9/11. And I happen to have networked with some organizations working along the same line, trying to promote interfaith activities post 9/11. One of them, Cordoba Initiative, by Imam Faisal, and another by his wife, I think Association for the Advancement of Muslims, ASMA Society, Association for Muslim Advancement. And they've been doing work with extremist groups. And I know the controversy that Cordoba generated when they were trying to look at what to do with the piece of land around Ground Zero. So I don't know what we can do to encourage the Oregon case study in places like that where it is most needed. is there a role for the media in promoting this sort of linkage between groups promoting intercultural dialogue, and those two groups I mentioned, Asthma Society and Cordova, are promoting intercultural dialogue. I remember attending a workshop for about 100 groups across board. This was women focused, and they had Jewish women, Christian women, Muslim women at the higher level. They said what they want to do is discuss the role of women in religion and how they can promote intercultural dialogue and interreligious dialogue. So what role can the media play in promoting this sort of interreligious and interfaith dialogue?
Just to be responsible, fair, and open-minded. And to be responsible, actually, as my colleagues and Mary was saying, there are stories that would sell your newspapers if you publish them, but they send the wrong message. They invoke old animosity. They divide the public. And so why would I cover such a voice, an extremist voice, and then look for somebody else from the other camp to respond to that and then go back? It's like I'm trying to, start something so I could sell my newspaper on that, and that's immoral and unethical. We are human. We are journalists, yes, and we are committed to free speech, and we are committed to being neutral and covering everything that the public needed to know. But we are also human and citizens and responsible, and we should not try to fool ourselves and say we are doing our duty. Actually, we are doing our duty to our commercial interest of our news organization by covering stories that has no benefit at all to the public, but in fact it's inciting trouble and inciting animosity between groups, and we could see what happened in Iraq and other troubles that started by the media, and still the fire is up because of the media.
One question I would have for the audience is, to what extent do you believe that our understanding that the media are not accurately depicting religions and faiths is true? Do you feel that could apply to your institution, your media?
Yeah, I'm Daoud Gutta from Jerusalem, a city that has a lot of faith based in it. I think, yes, the media is certainly guilty in large parts to the perpetuation of religious conflicts, ethnic conflicts, and so on. I would like to make a proposal to both IPI and KCD, which is that we work together on creating a manual for newspaper editors of, let's say, the politically correct words to use, terminology, because terminology is a huge problem. And most editors and journalists have blind spots about what words mean. What is the greater jihad? Most people don't know that it's the fight internally and how you fight against your own desires and negativities and so on. So if we could create, and this was done already on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we created a glossary of terminology that Israelis and Palestinians and internationals agreed to what are the neutral terms to deal with, very complicated issues. So I think it's something we can do. And to answer your question, Peter, yes, we are quite guilty because all of us have these blind spots. Because of the passion we have, because of the upbringing we come with, because of the nature of our own communities and the pressures, the real strong pressures that we have around us to toe a particular religious line or so on. And so we are guilty, and I'm really excited that KCD is interested in dialogue rather than converting people. I mean, that is really good.
Thank you, Dad. Could I just have a show of hands? How many people would actually be interested in a glossary like that? How many people it would help? Thank you very much. I had another question in the front, the gentleman in the front.
Thank you. I'm a bit worried by the statement that was just made just now that, not immediately now, but by the panelist about media starting wars. That is just made like that. I would want to know where that happened, because it's too big a throwaway line to be just put out like that.
Khalid, if you'd like to pick it up, yes.
I'm not sure. Who would you like to respond?
I'll give you an example that Mary was telling us the other day. There is a sheikh in the south of Lebanon called Ahmed al-Asir. He was totally unknown person. And then suddenly he came with an extremist message against other sects in Lebanon. Things were almost quiet at that time. But the media made an important person of him. They took his message incomplete without filtering. That incited other groups, and the other groups responded in kind. And they went there and looked for the extremist voice and covered them. And suddenly we have a war, a real war between them. Those people are bombing those people, and those people are, and those were started by the media. Other examples happened in Iraq, in Bahrain, for example, and other part in Yemen, and almost in Saudi Arabia. We almost started a war between Shia and Sunnah because the extremist media of both sides decided to go and look for troubles and animosity that 1,400 years old and come up with them. Why the trouble or the skirmish between Ali and Muawiyah and other, and they brought these stories now, and they went and looked for the extremist voice and made them stars. They took almost every day, and those people have no knowledge, no importance, except for the media, and they started wars this way. So I'm saying we should have a law against hate speech. You remember Rwanda, what happened? How it started? It started by the media, right? By the radios, who gave the Hutus, the extremists of the Hutus, the chance to attack the other part, the Tutsis. And after that, we lost almost 1 million people because of that. So if you want to give me an example, I will give you a lot of examples, especially from our Middle East trouble place. When you have people who are already sensitive, they want for the sound of a bullet to start a war, and then you give that bullet, a war would start, and you will be responsible. It will, you hold it in your conscience. So I am saying just be responsible. You know what happened. In Oregon, the media was very responsible. They knew that white America was so angry and so suspicious of Islam. And they could just write about other atrocities, about Osama bin Laden, about the tourists, the Islamic tourists, and they could write honestly about this news. But at that time, it was wrong. And they knew it was wrong. So they wrote about the other thing, about the peaceful nature of Islam, and the cooperation between religions and interfaith dialogue, and that helped at that moment.
Thank you, Khalid. I know that
just
Mary
quickly
and also
add-
Melissa would like to speak.
Yes, I'd just like to add to my colleague's comment. I think the general consensus on this panel, it's not deliberate. Media practitioners don't intend to go out and report or reconvey those extreme messages. Sometimes it's just it's the loudest voice that we tend to grab and we put in our news bulletin or we put into our paper. So I think what we're saying is we just need to understand as media professionals that we are working in a very powerful medium that directly enters into the psychology of our audience, whether we try or not. So we just need to perhaps be a little bit more selective in what we put out there and really think about whether it's necessary or not. That's I think what we're saying.
Melissa.
Like in the case of Liberia, some time ago, there were certain tribal groups that were held in prison for treason by the Liberian government. And the president at the time decided to free 2 of those people. And one of them was from the Quran speaking group, and the other one from the Mana speaking group. And these 2 tribal groups, they are at Loga. In fact, they were the very cause of the Liberian civil crisis. But the journalists went to report the story and said that 2 crime-free, 1 guilty in jail. He sensationalized the headline, and it kind of brought tension between the 2 tribal groups. So like what my colleagues just said, sometimes the manner in which we report will either bring war or bring peace.
I have a question in the back, Mohan. I think the gentleman right there.
My name is Mohamed Sabri. I'm from Cairo, Egypt. And I go back to the point made out by Dr. Khalid and Mary, which we discussed a couple days ago. I think that covering religious fanatics or the crazy sheikhs you gave as an example, as Muhammad al-Asir, is not a simple thing. You just can't decide not to cover them. Muhammad al-Asir, unfortunately, I think that the coverage of Muhammad al-Asir was late. It was an armed militia, and it was about to start a war, a civil strife in the town. And I think it was worth the coverage because we cannot leave such warmongers uncovered. We had another example in Cairo almost a year ago of a Shiite cleric in a very small town and a Salafist cleric who was a fanatic militant. And we finally woke up to the news of a massive crowd of Salafis breaking into the house of the Shiite cleric and killing him and 4 of his guests. I believe the whole world saw the video. So I think the decision to cover or not cover those fanatics is not very simple. It's definitely not as simple as we put it now, and it would take a lot of assessment before we do it. But we also have a lot of ethical guides that we stick to. And I think we can very much differentiate between promoting those fanatics and just covering them fairly and professionally.
Mohanad, I really appreciate your point and your experience working in Egypt. I think you, more than anybody else, would understand how complex the environment is. Just to clarify, I don't think the view is not to cover that particular incident, but perhaps maybe to filter. Of course, people who, claim that they are religious are involved in civil strife, conflicts, crisis, again, thinking about Syria. We can still cover the story. I just think we need to think about what environment we are operating in. And so, for me, I personally agree with you, and I think the way forward is, thorough guidelines and just thinking about what lines need to be included for the public interest. Thank you.
We have one more question. We have 10 minutes left, so I think we can fit in 3 or 4 more. Sir.
Okay, my name is Farid Sayed. I'm the editor of Muslim Views, which is a Cape Town-based Muslim newspaper. And I just want to the focus has been on, I think, how mainstream media covers Islam. And I think Matata's point, I take his point. Mainstream media, do they directly, you gave some examples, but I think I want to look at the responsibility that we as religious media have. And Melissa pointed out that in Liberia, there was Muslim media that promoted Muslim journalists and had a very sectarian kind of approach. Our experience and post-1994 has been to actively promote interfaith dialogue. And there are people in the community who are not too happy about the way we cover that, but we feel that just as we expect mainstream media to have to be responsible in reporting religion, I think we ignore to our peril the religious media, and I'm talking about Muslim community, for example, who have extremist views, and we should be engaging with them as well. And pre-1994, for example, in the apartheid era, when I started as a journalist, our focus was on the common struggles that we have as oppressed, for example. We didn't focus very narrowly on religious issues. And I think that is one way that we as religious media can perhaps add to create a greater understanding between faiths and get mainstream media to perhaps engage with us. I think there's not enough engagement between mainstream media and the religious media, particularly in a country like South Africa, where the Muslims are a minority, but quite a vociferous minority.
One of our colleagues in the working meeting brought up exactly this issue and the difficulty in creating that network. We would like to help. I can take 2 more questions. This lady here.
Yes, I thought my time would never come. Okay, I'm Mayor Sango from Liberia. And I would like to agree with what all the panelists said. The media sometimes inflate the situation. Sometimes we take the loudest voice, as she said, which is true. But in an environment, no matter how you report, you always step on someone's toe. When I was reporting on female circumcision, the traditional people that she talked about, 0.5, she said, they have the traditional relation, okay? So they felt offended. They said I brought out their secret. It was their secret. I shouldn't have written. Whereas, I thought I was educating people. That is why I embarked on a story. But I was still stepping on other people's toes. So how do we report? Anyway, you can help me answer that question.
Thank you very much. I had one more question in the back. Sir.
Well, it's just a quick observation about what you said about Rwanda, because we've got to sometimes explain some of our comments within the context that they should be understood. Because in Rwanda, obviously, and I understand Matata's point, the media didn't actually start the war, but of course the media was used, and it's a concern for us in the media to understand sometimes how we can responsibly get involved in telling these stories, and this is why we have to regulate ourselves, because the danger here is that if we let this go, that it was the media in a place like Rwanda, we are creating a platform and giving an open long rope to people who wants to clamp down on the media in a place like Rwanda, because I just covered a story there, and this is something that I have been challenging the president in Rwanda to give space to the media. But it's these sort of misunderstandings that it is the media that was responsible that sometimes get the government there to think we can clamp down on the media. So obviously, if we are sitting here as journalists saying it is the media, we are actually creating more problems for our colleagues in countries like these. I agree we have to regulate ourselves properly, but let's be careful with the context in pointing fingers on our colleagues, because there are people that will be creating more problems for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid at this moment I do have, we have 2 more minutes. Thank you, Sylvia. Yes, sir, please.
It's a very quick question to you, Peter. State advocated secularization, especially in countries like France and other European states in particular, where it comes across almost like a war against religion. Is your organization doing anything to engage them with respect to basic human rights, such as the women who wish to wear their veils or their scarves, and that sort of thing with regard to religion? Is KSET involved in that kind of advocacy at all?
We're involved wherever we can become involved in situations where there's tensions between two peoples. The question in the case of France, for instance, if this has been, this is a decision at the governmental level. Other European countries are considering other kinds of bans on garments, for instance, and limiting the freedom of expression. How could we, as KAICID, as an intergovernmental organization, create a dialogue between those governmental policymakers and the religious communities? If we could, we will. In conflict situations, we're just now slowly exploring what our possibilities are. Slowly, because we wish to be cautious. As it's like the Hippocratic Oath, we want to do good, we don't want to do harm. And the same thing is true there. We want to be able to enhance and strengthen existing dialogue if there's no dialogue at all, we wish to pioneer it. But we want to do it in a manner that's going to make it beneficial for all the stakeholders, which means, of course, this in some cases is going to be a long-winded process. We do have the beginnings of a relationship with the EU, and I'm sure these issues are also going to be discussed, but I can't tell you what we're going to do about that kind of thing now, because there are minority religious rights issues all across the globe, so we do have to literally pick our dialogues. Well, thank you very much. If I can just quickly summarize, because I know our time has really run out, and thank you so much for all of the questions. Clearly we have a recommendation, as we had on Saturday, for self-regulation. Self-regulation should not be a framework for censorship or a framework for a limitation of press freedom. At the same time, there's a capacity building issue. Certainly, you would like to include more voices if you could find them. How can you find them? And how can you be sure that the voices that you're including in your reporting are actually authoritative? They may even be exacerbating the problem. And finally, how do we, as Andy says, convince the news policymakers, those that decide what will be reported on and how, that this is actually an important issue? I'm very happy that you're interested. I hope you will stay engaged. I hope you will check out Andy's website and also our own and have a conversation with us. We're hoping to come back and give you much more specifics the next time we meet, and certainly the idea about the guidelines is extremely helpful. Thank you so much for your advice.